Hey friends, it's Sarah, and today I'm talking about the Goodreads Choice Awards. So as I'm sure a lot of you know, Goodreads has its Choice Awards voting rounds near the end of the year and then reveals its top books as chosen by the readers for that year. Right now we're in the final round of voting as of this filming. I'm not sure when I'm putting this video out, but the voting ends December 1st, and then sometime after that they will announce the winners. So this year there are 15 different categories. Each year they kind of like shift the categories around. Like I think it was last year they added a romantasy category, they took other ones away. So it's always interesting to see what categories they have chosen. Like this year there was no graphic novel category at all. Hey friends, it's Sarah, and today I'm talking about the Goodreads Choice Awards. But it's always interesting to see what categories there are. I think it is probably a bit of a reflection of the way that readers are leaning towards certain genres rather than others, like romantasy. So I wanted to talk about the books that I've read from the different categories. I have a couple books on there that I also want to read but haven't gotten around to reading yet, and at the end I have a few books that I would have included on the list, whether in categories that were chosen or in categories that were not represented by the polls. But without further ado, let's get into it. Let's talk about these awards. So the first category is fiction, and I have only read one book in that category, and it was I Hope This Finds You Well by Natalie Sue. I gave this book 5 stars. So the author is actually from Calgary, where I'm from, which was very exciting. But this is a book that follows a woman who has been writing what she really thinks of her coworkers in like white text at the bottom of her emails. And one day she gets caught, and as a punishment for that, as like her disciplinary action, she has to go through some HR course, but she also has to be monitored. Like all of her office computer stuff will be monitored to make sure that she is not doing stuff like this again. And unfortunately, due to some IT mishap, she accidentally gains access to everyone else's DMs and emails and private messages. So she starts kind of using that as a way to, get herself out of trouble, to manipulate people a little bit. But as it goes on, she starts to find out that that her coworkers are people too, and they have their own things going on. And it's actually quite a lovely book about seeing people complexly and the benefits and joys of getting to know people more deeply, and the way that our connection can help us all become better people. This was a 5-star read for me. I really loved it, and I just was not expecting it to be quite as lovely as it is, because it starts off kind of like funny. It's a little dry and sarcastic, and everyone's a little bit unlikable. But then it became really heartwarming, and it made me feel a lot of really deep emotions. So I would highly recommend this one. I read none of the books in the historical fiction category. I also read none of the books in the thrillers category, because those are 2 genres that I don't really touch. So we'll skip right by those. For the romance category, I had read 3 books. I read Funny Story by Emily Henry, of course. This is about 2 people whose exes are now engaged to each other, and they're kind of living as roommates in the wake of this massive breakup, and then they are trying to, deal with the fall of that and attend their ex's wedding as a fake dating couple. But then of course they start to fall for each other, and it's very cute. It's Emily Henry. It's 5 stars all the time. It's very fun. I also read This Summer Will Be Different by Carley Fortune. That one was also 5 stars for me. I really enjoyed it. Carley Fortune is a Canadian author as well, which was excellent. Love a Canadian author. And I really liked her first book, did not enjoy her second book, and I really loved her third book. So this book follows Lucy, who in the past had gone to PEI and had a fling with a local, and then found out it is her best friend's brother and been like, absolutely not, can't do this, big whoops, we're never going to mention it again. And now in the present, Lucy's best friend has kind of vanished from her wedding planning and run away to their vacation house in PEI. So Lucy goes to follow her to make sure she's okay, and of course the brother's there, and so there's the tension between them. They've never really gotten over the chemistry that they had all those years ago. But this was really good, romantic. I love the PEI setting. I've never been, but it sounded so idyllic and lovely. And the friendship between the two women was also very beautiful. There was, I think my like one small little complaint with it was that the best friend just like would not talk about what was going on with her. Like her wedding was in a week and she was like, I'm just here, it's fine. Even though I'm like a type A person who would normally be like head down planning in the city, it's totally normal that I'm at my vacation house and just wouldn't tell anyone about it, which I found quite frustrating. But the like romance was really good, the chemistry was great, and I really enjoyed most of this book. So I'd say it was probably about like a 4.5 stars. Then I also read The Paradise Problem by Christina Lauren. This one I gave 4 stars. It was pretty fun as well. It's a marriage of convenience fake dating combo of tropes. So the main characters got married in university so that they could live in like family housing on campus because it was cheaper and, you know, on campus. And then they got like divorced once they had both completed their programs. They didn't really know each other. They just kind of lived as like normal like roommates. And then they got divorced. And now several years later, the guy reappears and is like, hey, so you didn't actually sign the divorce papers properly and we're still married. And can you please pretend to like be my actual wife for this family giant wedding on a private island so that I can gain access to my inheritance? Which is such a ridiculous plot, but it was really fun. It reminded me a little bit of like Crazy Rich Asians with all of the insane wealth, the like private island that they're on, the beautiful wedding, the misbehaving characters. They got all this money and no manners. So it was really good. It was really fun. The chemistry was pretty good. Yeah, 4-star read. I've read none of the romantasy books. I haven't found a romantasy book that has really grabbed me yet. I think I prefer more of a like mostly fantasy with some romance in it and not so much the half and half or even more like a romance that just happens to be in a fantasy setting. That doesn't really appeal to me as much, so I tend not to enjoy the romantasy books that I've tried. For example, Fourth Wing, I made a whole video about how I felt about that one, which I will link up top and in the doobly-doo. So for fantasy, I have actually read Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett. This is the second book in the Emily Wilde series, and it was great. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoy these books. It's Emily Wilde's journal. She's like an academic who studies fairies and like the fae and all that. I'm not going to tell you the plot of this book because it's kind of spoilery for the end of the first book, but it's Emily Wilde and her colleague Wendell Bambleby who are on another shenanigan adventure. It's not shenanigans, it's higher stakes than that. Who are on an adventure dealing with like the fair folk and all sorts of good stuff. But I really like these. Emily is a very kind of like dry, no nonsense character, so reading her journal is very fun. And then the love interest, he's selfish but he's like charming, and so you kind of forgive him for it. And I just really enjoy these. I think they're really fun. And there's like a little bit of romance. It's not, I wouldn't say this is like romantasy. I think it's been called that before. There is like a little romance in it, but it is more like plot and like fantasy forward with just like kind of a thread of romance that goes through, which is, it's very sweet romance. I do enjoy it a lot, but it's definitely more about the studying the fair folk and all those adventures and mishaps that they end up going on. In this category, I also read The Lost Story by Meg Shaffer, which I gave 4 stars as well. So The Lost Story follows Emily Wendell, like Emily and then Wendell, the love interest, which is interesting. I don't know if that's a coincidence or if she read Emily Wilde. Anyways, it follows Emily, whose sister went missing in a forest, and she has contacted this kind of private investigator who him and his brother had actually gone missing in the same forest when they were children and then like reappeared several months later, and now he's like really good at tracking down people. And so now they're going on this quest to kind of find her sister, and it turns out, this is in like the back of the book in the blurb, that the 2 boys, when they were like missing in the forest, they'd actually gone to like a different realm, so now they have to all travel into this realm to try and find the sister. And this was really good. It was inspired by the Chronicles of Narnia, so it's kind of got like a bit of that vibe to it. There's a little bit of romance in it. I really like this author's writing. I read her other book, The Wishing Game, and I think she has really beautiful, like kind of cozy, almost like fable-like books. but they have like a lot of emotional depth and the characters are very interesting, and I really enjoyed it. This was another good book. It was 4 stars for me. Okay, then in the science fiction category, the only book that I had read was Ministry of Time by Kaliane Bradley, and this was another excellent book. This was 4.5 stars for me. I don't know if I would necessarily classify it as science fiction. It's kind of hard to describe. It's a lot of genres in one. So it's basically that the British government has found a time travel machine from somewhere, I don't know, and they're trying to figure out what the effect of time travel on people is before they start sending like their own people all through time and maybe killing them or harming them. So what they do is they go into the past and they take people who they know when they died. So they pluck them out of history at the moment where they would have died, bring them to the present, and then they have caseworkers who live with them and kind of watch over them, help them acclimate to the present day and like study the effects that this like time displacement is having on them. And so our main character is an unnamed worker, and she ends up being assigned to this like Arctic explorer guy. And it's like a bit of a slice of life kind of story going on with the two of them living together and like her teaching him how to navigate the world. You have these other interesting characters who've been plucked from history and who are, you know, relating to each other in different ways. They all have like different views and different like perspectives on how things should be, and but then they also have this camaraderie of like, I am in a new place, this is all so unfamiliar to me, but like you know what that's like, so I can relate to you more than I can relate to my caseworker who is, you know, from this time. And there's also a bit of kind of like espionage stuff, like something weird's going on in the ministry. There's all that kind of intrigue. There's a bit of a romance going on. The writing in this is very beautiful, and it was just, I don't know, it was a lot of things, and I really liked it. I think the only reason it wasn't 5 stars was because towards the end it got a little rushed. I felt like wrapping up some of the like mysteries that had been trickling along in the book got wrapped up really quickly, and I was kind of like, wait, what's happening? What's going on? So I feel like the ending could have done with a little tweaking, but like the rest of the book was so good and so enchanting that I didn't care as much. I was like, But yeah, it was really interesting. It made me think a lot. I think there's a lot of discussion around identity and feeling like you're caught between 2 places or 2 identities. And yeah, I don't know why I don't own this book. I'm going to buy this book at some point because I really loved it and I kind of want to read it again. I have read absolutely none of the horror books because I'm a little scared baby. And for the debut books, I read The Ministry of Time that I just talked about, so I have nothing more to add to that. I did not read any of the audiobooks as audiobooks. I think this is a new inclusion this year, which is interesting. Up next in the YA fantasy category, I read Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. This one I gave 4 stars. It was a follow-up to Divine Rivals, and it was good, but it wasn't quite as good as the first one. So it was 4 stars. I won't talk about the plot, but yeah, it was enjoyable. Then I also read Heir by Sabaa Tahir. This is the first one in her new duology. This is an ARC that I got. Thank you to, who is it, Penguin Random House, Penguin Teen, for saying this to me. While it's not a like sequel to An Ember in the Ashes, it is kind of like a follow-up series. It follows the children of the main characters from that series, and so it helps to have read that first, and then you can kind of understand what's going on here a bit better. This one I also gave 4 stars. I actually really liked it. The beginning was like a little slow to get going, but then it got really good. And then I just like blew through it. There's a little bit of romance in this as well. This is like a really good example of the kind of like romantic fantasy sort of thing that I like. It's mostly fantasy. There's like a bit of romance, maybe a couple romances like throughout the pages, but it's not like, I don't feel like there's ever a point where we're like, and now we pause the plot so that we can have lots of romance happening and then we will like resume the plot. I find that very frustrating. So I think this does a good job of kind of like weaving it in amongst the plot and not splitting it up weirdly. The world building in this again is great. There were some wonderful twists and turns. The characters were all really interesting. She introduces a new kind of land, new powers, new magic. It's kind of like a political fantasy a little bit. There's countries at war, there's invasions and occupations, and it's just really good. It's really good. I cannot wait for the sequel. I don't know when that's coming out. I'm assuming in like a couple years maybe, but it was excellent and I can't wait for number 2. So the next category was YA fiction, and I read Gwen and Art Are Not in Love by Lex Croucher. That one was 3.5 stars. I wanted to love it, and I thought it was okay, decent, but not, didn't blow my mind. I love the cover so much, and the idea of it was so good, but it just wasn't to my taste. So this is kind of like a medieval rom-com. Their Art is the descendant of like the mythical King Arthur, and he's gay, and then he's engaged to be married to the Princess of England, Gwendolen, and she's also gay, which is great, is very fun. So they're kind of like stuck in this engagement that neither of them want to be in, and Gwendolen's in love with a lady knight, and then Arthur falls in love with Gwen's brother. So it's fun rom-com shenanigans. Reading a Goodreads review now, it did quote the epic highs and lows of high school football from Riverdale. So maybe I didn't like the more contemporary rom-com tone of the book for a medieval story. I don't know, it wasn't quite what I wanted, but it was still fine. It was still good. It was a cute little like queer rom-com, so good fluff. And then I also read Heartstopper Volume 5 by Alice Oseman. This 5 stars. It just was so good and so devastating and so sweet and painful, and like these boys are going through it, y'all. Protect Nick and Charlie, these poor boys. I love the Heartstopper series. I love the Netflix series. I think they're such a beautiful ode to queer love and growing up, and I just, they're great. They're excellent. You can read the Heartstopper comics online for free. So even if you don't want to buy the books or can't get them out of your library, like they're online for free. And I just think they're so wholesome and sweet and loving, even though they do touch on tougher topics like mental health and bullying and homophobia. At the core, they're just such a beautiful love story. The friendships in it are all so wonderful. These children are so good, and it's just such sweethearts, all of them. I love them so much. And I think they're such a good series for like teenagers who are growing up. It's such a good model of like ways you can be accountable to your friends, and like, you know, you can have difficulties in your friendships and still make it through and apologize to each other and make amends. It's just good. It's just so good. I cannot recommend them enough. 5 stars. And I feel like I'm gonna start crying talking about them, which is interesting. Didn't expect that to happen, but I love Heartstopper a lot. Okay, the last 2 categories were nonfiction, memoir, and then history and biography, and I read none of the books in any of those categories, so we're not going to talk about them. But now that we've talked about the books I have read, I wanted to talk about some of the books that I have not yet read, but that I do want to read. In the romantasy category, I did want to read The Spellshop by Sarah Beth Durst, which is kind of like a cottagecore style romantasy, where the main character, after there's like a revolution, she has to flee back to her childhood home on an island, and then she starts like making jam and opens up kind of like a secret spell shop, which seems very fun. The plot reminds me a little bit of like Legends and Lattes kind of vibes, but I don't think it's gay, which is too bad. But it does sound cute, so I do want to give that one a try. I think the kind of cozy fantasy romantasy is maybe more my vibe than something like From Blood and Ash. And then in science fiction, I want to read Orbital by Samantha Harvey. This did win the Booker Prize Award for 2024. It's just like a little book, but it's about 6 astronauts who are on the International Space Station, and so I thought it just sounded kind of interesting. I don't know what the plot is. I don't know if there is a plot or if it's just kind of that, but it just sounded neat. In horror, I actually did want to read Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. Yes, it's that Chuck Tingle, if you don't know. Chuck Tingle writes both like Amazon short stories that are all like weird erotica romance, kind of like there's a lot of like pounded in the butt by sort of things. I'll put up a cover of his stuff here if you've not heard of him. It's pretty funny. But he also writes horror books, and I read Camp Damascus by him, which was set in a like conversion camp. So it's this kid who thinks she's going to like summer camp, and then it turns out it's actually like a gay conversion camp to try and, you know, turn the kids straight, which is horrific enough, but then there's like supernatural creepiness going on in there, and it was really good. So I want to read Bury Your Gaze because I think he does a good job of writing horror, and specifically like queer horror. So this follows a scriptwriter who is just been nominated for his first Oscar, but then his producers on a show he's currently writing are pressuring him to kill off a gay character for the season finale, and he's kind of grappling with that decision whether he should, you know, bury your gaze. I'm not sure where the horror comes in here. So I'm really curious to see what the horror aspect is, because this just sounds like kind of like philosophical fighting with yourself, but I'm sure there's a lot more to it. One review does say that it has great elements of psychological terror and body horror, but is also a layered tale of corporate greed and queer erasure. So it sounds good. I like Chuck Tingle's horror stuff. Can't say I've read any of his romance or erotica, I guess, but it also sounds funny. In the debut books category, I want to read Martyr by Kaveh Akhbar, mostly because John Green said it was the best book that he read this year, and I trust his taste in books. I like his stuff, and I love Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which he also loved. But this is about a newly sober orphan son of Iranian immigrants, is guided by the voice of artists, poets, and kings, and embarks on a search that leads him to a terminally ill painter living out her final days in the Brooklyn Museum. So it sounds interesting. I think it's a very thinky book. Lots of thinky thoughts in there. It's literary fiction is what I'm trying to say. But it sounds interesting, and I trust John Green's taste in books. I also want to read The Truth According to Ember by Danica Nava. So this is a romance. It's kind of like a workplace romance book about an Indigenous woman who lied on her resume saying she was white because she was not getting any jobs when she was saying she was Indigenous. And then she gets hired at this office job. She's living that corporate life and starts to fall for the Indigenous IT guy, and they get caught in a compromising position on a work trip, and she's being blackmailed, and it sounds very interesting. I have not read any romance books by Indigenous authors, so I'm very curious to see this, and one of my coworkers really enjoyed this book, so I actually have it back here from the library. I cannot get it because I currently have a cat in my lap, but it is high on my list to read next. I also want to read How to End a Love Story by Yulin Kuang. So this author is actually the one who is adapting Emily Henry's People Meet on Vacation for the screen. I can't remember if it's a TV show or a movie. I think it's a TV show, but she's writing that script, so I thought it'd be interesting to read her book that she has written. So this follows two TV show writers who had some big event in the past that led them to no longer speak to each other, and now they're working on a project together, and the past is coming back to haunt them, and they're still drawn to each other, so it's a second chance, kind of like enemies to lovers sort of vibe, or maybe friends to enemies to lovers, I'm not sure, but I mostly was intrigued by this because this is the person who's adapting People Meet on Vacation, and I was like, I want to see what her writing's like. Finally, I wanted to submit 3 books that I would have added to the Goodreads Choice Awards. So for the YA fiction category, I would add Compound Fracture by Andrew Joseph White. This was a 5-star read for me. I really love all of Andrew's books. He writes like teen horror, I would say, usually pretty visceral body horror. This one is set in the Appalachian region of the US, and it follows a trans boy who is dealing with the effects of this like generations long feud between his family and like kind of the sheriff of the town's family. It deals with like poverty, with legacy, revenge. It's very intense, it's really good, it's action-packed, And I love his writing so much. I think it's very engrossing, sometimes a little gross as well. This one wasn't as much of body horror as some of his other ones, like Spirit Bears Its Teeth was very body horror because the main character, he's very like, he wants to be a surgeon, so he thinks a lot about the insides, and he also wants a hysterectomy really badly, so he thinks about like performing a hysterectomy on himself a lot. And then the other one, Hell Follows With Us, was like entirely body horror. There's like a plague that like liquefies your insides and stuff. So pretty gross out stuff. I am shocked that I can even read any of it, but I think they're so well written and they're so interesting that I push through the grossness of it because the story's worth it. I'd also say probably in the same category, or if we had like a separate graphic novel category, The Deep Dark by Molly Knox Ostertag. This is a teen graphic novel that is just really spectacular. I gave it 5 stars. I am gifting it this Christmas to other people. I need to buy a copy for myself actually. It follows 2 girls who were like childhood friends, and now the one girl has like come back to town and they're kind of rekindling their friendship, maybe like falling for each other, but the one who's been in town the whole time, she has a secret, there's like a family kind of curse that she's kind of in charge of mitigating. I don't want to give away spoilers, but it was very beautiful. I love Molly Knox Ostertag's art. I think the use of colors in this was really thoughtful and interesting. There's themes of like relationships, family responsibilities, kind of like parentification a little bit. It was just really beautiful and emotional, and it made me cry. Let's be real, guys. If you're on AO3 and you like hurt comfort fix, you will like this. It's got that sort of dynamic in it. It's really good. Finally, my pick for historical fiction would be The Science Factory by Bridget Collins. I'm not done this yet. I'm 2/3 of the way through, I would say, but I'm really enjoying it. This is the author who wrote The Binding, which I loved, and The Betrayals, which was very confusing, but I also enjoyed. And this is set across 2 timelines. So there's one timeline where a woman follows her husband to these Greek islands looking for these like mysterious, mythical kind of spiders. Is questioning all of her life decisions. And then several decades later, it follows the descendant of that couple who is running a silk factory with the silk from these spiders that creates like perfect silence. And it follows him and this young man who is kind of joined to try and like grow the business and like get it sold to people. But of course there are like side effects and it's kind of sinister and it's really good. I'm really enjoying it. I think it's probably going to be a 4.5 stars for me unless something goes horribly wrong. But I love Bridget Collins' writing. I think it's very intelligent. It's very interesting. This one I would say is a little more accessible than The Betrayals for sure. Maybe even than The Binding, but I think is fascinating. I love living in her brain. It's a very odd place, and it's great. Those are all of the books that I have read, want to read, or I think were missed out on for the Goodreads Choice Awards this year. Let me know what some of the books you voted for were, and I guess we'll find out soon which books actually made it on the list. But thank you so much for watching it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time. Now go read a book. And here's Daisy. Oh, which one is this one? Oh, is this the one where you're going to the forest? Oh, this is really distracting. My camera's mirrored and it's like, what's happening? They're in PEI. They're shucking oysters. And clothing. Then I also read The Parodies